The sound of fists pounding against metal doors echoed through the prison corridor. Voices shouted, guards ran, and somewhere in the chaos, a man collapsed onto the cold concrete floor of his cell. One moment, he was standing, breathing, alive, like everyone else in that block, and the next moment, his body went limp. Inmates pressed their faces against the bars, trying to see what was happening. Guards rushed in, shouting orders, while a medic dropped to his knees beside the motionless prisoner. "No pulse," someone said urgently. Seconds later, the heart monitor confirmed it. The toughest man in that entire cell block had just flatlined. Men who had feared him for years stood in stunned silence as guards worked desperately to revive him. But while his lifeless body lay on the floor, surrounded by shouting voices and flashing equipment, something unbelievable was happening somewhere beyond those concrete walls. Because the man they believed was dead says he had already left that place, and what he saw during those few minutes would later bring hardened criminals, men who had never cried in their lives, to tears. The man I'm talking about isn't known by his real name in this story. For the sake of protecting identities, we will call him Daniel. Daniel was not the kind of man people expected to talk about spiritual experiences. His life had been filled with anger, violence, and survival. Growing up in an environment where weakness was dangerous, he learned early how to fight, how to intimidate, and how to live without trusting anyone. By the time he was a teenager, he had already been arrested multiple times. By his 20s, he was deeply involved in crime and eventually ended up behind prison walls serving a long sentence. Inside prison, Daniel quickly built a reputation. He was known as someone who didn't fear anyone and who never backed down from a fight. Inmates avoided him, guards watched him closely, and over time, he hardened even more. He later admitted that by the time he arrived in prison, he didn't believe in God, didn't believe in forgiveness, and didn't believe people could change. His philosophy was simple: survive and never show weakness. But the night his heart stopped would challenge everything he thought he knew about life. It started like any ordinary evening inside the prison. The cell block was loud, with voices echoing through the corridor. Some inmates were arguing, others were laughing or shouting across the hall. Daniel sat on the edge of his bunk staring at the ceiling when suddenly a strange pressure formed in the center of his chest. At first, he ignored it. Pain wasn't unusual in prison life, but the pressure quickly became stronger. It felt like something heavy was pushing down on his heart. His breathing became shallow, and sweat formed on his forehead. He stood up, trying to shake it off, but the moment he took a step, the room spun violently. His legs collapsed beneath him, and the last thing he saw before hitting the floor was the fluorescent light above his head flickering. This story is based on a real testimony, but identities have been protected using AI. What happened next is something Daniel says he will never forget for the rest of his life. He expected darkness. He expected nothingness. Instead, he felt something that completely confused him: peace. When he opened his eyes, he thought he had woken up, but the world looked different. He realized he was standing in his cell, yet at the same time, he could see his body lying on the floor. Guards were kneeling beside it, and a medic was pushing down hard on his chest, trying to restart his heart. Daniel could hear their voices, but they sounded distant, almost like echoes coming from another room. Strangely, he felt no fear. In fact, he felt lighter than he had ever felt before. Then the walls of the prison cell began fading away. The concrete dissolved into darkness, and the shouting voices slowly disappeared. Daniel suddenly felt himself being pulled somewhere. He couldn't see what was pulling him, but he felt himself moving rapidly through a dark tunnel. At first, there was nothing but shadow surrounding him, but far ahead in the distance, he noticed something glowing faintly, a small light. As he moved closer, the light grew brighter and warmer. The darkness around him began disappearing until the light filled everything he could see. He said it wasn't just light like a lamp or the sun. It felt alive. It felt peaceful and welcoming in a way he had never experienced before. The tunnels suddenly opened, and Daniel found himself standing in a place so beautiful he struggled to describe it. There were no prison bars, no concrete walls, no anger or fear anywhere. Everything around him was filled with a radiant glow that felt warm and comforting. And then Daniel realized something else. He was not alone. In the distance, he could see figures standing quietly. They appeared human, but they seemed to radiate light around them. They watched him with expressions that felt full of understanding rather than judgment. But one presence stepped forward, and immediately Daniel knew this presence was different. It shone brighter than everything else in that place. The moment Daniel became aware of it, something extraordinary happened. His entire life began unfolding around him like a living movie. Every moment he had ever lived appeared before him. Every crime, every fight, every lie, every person he had hurt. But this time, he didn't just watch those moments like memories. He felt them. He felt the fear of the people he had threatened. He felt the pain of the people he had harmed. He felt the heartbreak of families affected by his actions. For the first time in his life, Daniel understood the full weight of everything he had done. He collapsed to his knees, crying uncontrollably. He expected anger or punishment from the presence in front of him, but instead he felt something completely unexpected: love. An overwhelming wave of love surrounded him, stronger than anything he had ever felt before. It was pure and powerful and completely undeserved. Then the presence spoke. Not with a voice that came through the air, but with a message that filled his mind and heart at the same time. The message said, "You were not created to live this way." Those words struck Daniel deeply. His entire life had been built on survival and violence, yet here was a presence telling him that his life had been meant for something greater. Then something else appeared before him. Daniel suddenly saw the prison again. He saw the men walking through the corridors of the cell block, faces filled with anger, regret, hopelessness, and despair. Men who believed their lives were already ruined forever. Then the message came again, clearly. Tell them it is not too late. Daniel realized the message wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who believed they were too broken to be forgiven or too lost to find their way back. The presence spoke again, saying love can reach even the darkest places. The peace Daniel felt in that moment was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. For the first time in his life, he felt truly free. He didn't want to leave that place, but the presence told him gently that he must return. Suddenly, the light faded, and the peaceful world disappeared. Daniel felt himself moving backward through the tunnel again. Then, pain exploded in his chest. Air rushed violently into his lungs, and his body jerked as his eyes snapped open under the harsh fluorescent lights of the prison. The medic jumped back in shock and shouted that he was breathing again. Daniel had been clinically dead for several minutes. Word spread quickly throughout the cell block that something unbelievable had happened. The toughest man in the prison had come back from death. But what shocked everyone even more was what happened afterwards. Daniel began telling other inmates about what he saw. At first, they laughed. They thought it was just a hallucination caused by trauma. But when they saw tears running down his face, the laughter stopped. This was a man who had never shown emotion before. One night, he gathered several inmates together and told them the entire story. When he finished speaking, the room was silent. Then something unexpected happened. One inmate began crying quietly. Another wiped tears from his eyes. Soon, several men who had spent years hiding behind anger and violence stood silently with tears running down their faces. Because for the first time, many of them believed something they had never believed before, that maybe their lives were not beyond redemption, that maybe change was still possible. Daniel says the message he received that day never left him. No matter how dark someone's past may be, it is never too late to change. And now I want to ask you something. How many people walk through life believing they are too broken to be forgiven or too lost to find their way back? What if the truth is that hope and redemption are always closer than we think? If this story moved you or made you reflect on your own life, share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe experiences like this reveal something about life beyond death? And if this message touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need hope today, and subscribe to this channel for more powerful near-death experience stories. Because sometimes the people who return from the edge of eternity bring back the messages the world needs to hear the most.